ओके, 2 पैसेजेस और पढ़ेंगे हम 29 जून के लिए। यूक्रेन वगैरह का थोड़ा थोड़ा ड्रामा उसमें है इसलिए। इन यूक्रेन्स शैडो, G7 meet framed a West preparing for a prolonged conflict. Global community must find ways to mitigate its fallout. बोला हाँ, ये लोग G7 में मिल करके ना काम की बात कम और ये रशिया के खिलाफ ये सब करने के ड्रामे ज़्यादा कर रहे हैं, तो ये अच्छी बात नहीं है। ऐसी टेंशन्स बिल्डअप होती होती बाद में जा करके फटेगी। इन जर्मनी, नाम ही गलत ले लिया शुरू में ही, जर्मनी। In Germany, as in much of the world in recent months, Ukraine cast a long shadow. At the summit of the G7, which was also attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the leaders of the South Africa and Indonesia, among others, the message was clear. हमको बताओ क्या message clear? The US and its allies foresee a prolonged conflict in Ukraine and they will continue to support Volodymyr Zelensky, who made an in camera appeal to the leaders at the summit via video, and the people of Ukraine in their fight against a militarily superior neighbor. For now, the differences within the G7 with regard to their reliance on Russian commodity exports, especially the dependence on Russian natural gas, have been put aside, and the grouping has vowed to align and expand targeted sanctions to further restrict Russia's access to key industrial inputs, services, and technology. बोल बच्चन है भाई. With the NATO summit following the G7 meet, the contours of the strategic conversation around Ukraine were laid out. ठीक है. Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated New Delhi's position in unequivocal terms. There must be an immediate cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, and dialogue and diplomacy are the way forward. सब चंगा सी होना चाहिए है. While the resolve to sideline Russia and support Ukraine for as long as it takes appears to hold firm at the moment, popular support to act against Moscow may wane as the war drags on and economies continue to suffer the pain. The fact is that as the conflict has progressed, its effects have been felt far beyond Europe. Food and fuel inflation continue to be on the rise and have hit the poorest people and nations the hardest. If, as Zelensky reportedly said in his address to the leaders gathered in Bavaria, the conflict gains new momentum in the winter, the global community must find ways to offset the economic and humanitarian crisis that will likely ensue in Europe and beyond. On the economic front, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment (PGII), announced by US President Joe Biden, holds promise. Under it, the G7 has committed to invest $600 billion by 2027 in a host of countries, including India, in critical infrastructure that improves lives and delivers real gains for all of our people. The PGII aims to act as both an alternative and foil to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has lately been seen as imposing an untenable debt burden on developing economies such as Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Along with the reasonable request by India for greater investment by the developing world in clean technologies to mitigate climate change, the PGII could help build more resilient, मतलब वही अल्टरनेटिव मॉडल बनाने की बात चल रही है. अभी एक और आया था इंडो पैसिफिक इकोनॉमिक फ्रेमवर्क करके कुछ या स्ट्रेटिजिक फ्रेमवर्क करके. पर यार ये सारी चीज़ें जब तक मटीरियलाइज नहीं होती ना, ऑन ग्राउंड जब तक कुछ नहीं होता ना, तो ये हवा में गुब्बारे हैं ये बेसिकली बस. ये भी इसी बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. G7 has declined but is still powerful. India's participation in the meeting as an observer serves to advance its foreign and security policy. पढ़ लो. The meeting of G7 leaders that concluded in Bavaria in Germany on Monday was an important one since it took place against the backdrop of a triple crisis: the war in Ukraine, the challenge of post-pandemic economic recovery, and the eternal issue of climate change. In the circumstances, the G7 countries managed to present a united front which was noteworthy. Okay. A standalone G7 statement on support for Ukraine was issued, an unmistakable indication of what was foremost in the minds of the leaders of these countries. There was an unconditional commitment that the grouping will provide financial, humanitarian, military, and diplomatic support and stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. अब जैसे यार कुछ लोग जैसे मतलब वैल्यू लेडन बात ही है कि मतलब जैसे कुछ लोग बोलते हैं ना कि वेस्ट वाले तो आकर के यूक्रेन को बेवकूफ़ बना दिया लड़ ले करके और फिर पीठ दिखा गए. ऐसा नहीं है. मतलब वो सब कर रहे हैं जो मतलब जो कर सकते हैं बेसिकली यार, डिक्लेयरिंग अ वॉर ऑन अ कंट्री लाइक रशिया और फॉर दैट मैटर इन एनी पार्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड राइट नाउ, ये टेंशन्स को बढ़ाना, एस्केलेशंस को बढ़ाना, वॉर मॉन्गरिंग इज नॉट द ऑप्शन। जो इकनॉमी की इतनी गंदी हालत चल रही है ना सो कॉल्ड, ये तो एकदम गिर ही जाएगी अगर ऐसा कुछ करते हैं तो। सो दे आर ट्राइंग टू डू समथिंग कि भाई सांप भी मर जाए और लाठी भी ना टूटे, तो इतने गलत वो भी नहीं है। Predictably, the statement comes down very hard on Russia and comes close to accusing it of war crimes. Russia was also warned that any use, ये सब प्रेशर बिल्डिंग की हरकतें हैं, सैंक्शन बनाना और ये सब वॉर क्राइम्स के लिए अक्यूज करना, ताकि यार आदमी माने तो सही कभी। Russia was also warned that any use of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons would be met with severe consequences. Further intensification of sanctions against Russia was contemplated, including tariffs on Russian products, targeting gold exports, capping oil prices, and restricting access to technology. Despite the toughly worded statement, it is unlikely the war in Ukraine will come to a quick halt. Indeed, the G7 statement may have the opposite effect of increasing Russia's intransigence. और भड़का दो उसको. Worse, increasing military assistance by the West to Ukraine, evidenced by the impending supply of the Norwegian Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System (NASAMS), used by the Americans to protect the White House, by the US to Ukraine, could lead to an arms race. Russia, too, by relentlessly pursuing hostilities in the Donbas region, Coleridge, I guess, is not helping matters. As if all this were not enough, NATO, ahead of its summit meeting in Madrid following the G7 summit, has already let it be known that its rapid reaction force meant to protect the alliance's eastern flank will be increased from its present strength of 40,000 to a whopping 3 lakh. ये भी अग्निवीर बनाएंगे. NATO's Secretary General minced no words when he termed Russia as a most immediate threat to NATO's security and hinted that the alliance's deployments will now be much closer to Russian borders. More fundamentally, the NATO concept of deterrence, when it comes to the Baltic states, appear to have undergone a paradigm shift. The alliance has made its resolve clear to protect every inch of its territory. Whichever way one looks at it, the war in Ukraine is not going to end anytime soon. Significantly, the G7 final communique has tough language on China as well. It says there is no legal basis for China's expansive maritime claims in the South Chinese Sea. It calls on China to press Russia to withdraw troops from Ukraine and expresses grave concern about the country's human rights situation. अच्छा, ये चाइना को बोल ले तेरे भाई को मना ले. भाई खुद ही नहीं मान रहा वो. It calls on China to respect universal human rights and fundamental freedoms in both Tibet and Xinjiang, highlighting the issue of forced labor in the latter. If Russia has reason to be dissatisfied with the G7 final communique, then China has reason to be absolutely livid with it. For India, G7 summits have always been an invaluable opportunity to exchange views, not just in a plurilateral format, but also in the bilateral meetings on the margins of the main meetings. ये शब्द है ना, ये पेपर में ड्रॉप कर देते हैं ना तो बहुत मज़ा आता है, मतलब नंबर ज़्यादा आते हैं. मज़ा क्या आएगा इसमें कि भाई ऐसे जो ये होते हैं कि भाई प्लूरीलैटरल डायलॉग कर लो साहब, है ना, उसके बगल बगल में बायलैटरल भी कर लो साहब, मल्टीलैटरल कर लो. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meetings with President Joe Biden of the US and President Emmanuel Macron of France, as also with the leaders of the UK and Japan, were extremely timely. The meeting with the Canadian PM was useful too, given the recent ups and downs in the relationship between the two countries. The meetings with Indonesian, South African, and Argentinian leaders may be seen against the impending assumption of the G20 presidency by India. India will be consulting closely with Indonesia to see how the Ukraine issues plays out at the G20 meeting. हाँ, ये सब वही बातें हैं. G7 कर लो, G20 कर लो, बातें कर लो बस. The fact is that even the G7 knows its clout has declined compared to, say, 20 years ago. That explains the move to invite key G20 countries as observers to its summits. As for India, its importance lies in the undeniable truth that no global problem can be seriously tackled without New Delhi's involvement. My God, too arrogant. The question is whether India can use this to make the full transition from being a rule taker to becoming a rule shaper in at least some crucial areas. India has lent its name to two statements issued by the G7. One is titled Resilient Democracy Statement, and the other is Joining Forces to Accelerate Clean and Just Transition Towards Climate Neutrality. Oh, हो. अब पूछ लेना भाई, स्टेटमेंट में आ जाए कि ये दोनों जो रेजोल्यूशंस हैं ये G7 के हैं, ठीक है, इंडिया ने दोनों को साइन किया है, बोला है, हाँ सही है, दोनों स्टेटमेंट सही है. The first statement talks of democracies as really reliable partners seeking to promote a rules-based international order. फिर से ये वैसा ही एक शब्द है जैसा अभी plurilateral multilateral कर रहे थे ना, ये शब्द अच्छा है पटकने के लिए. Rules-based international order and supporting democracy, ये नया आ गया है आपसे, supporting democracy worldwide including through electoral assistance. It is interesting to note that these democracies have also committed to fighting climate change, improving food security, pursuing concerted efforts to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, fighting corruption, protecting freedom of expression both online and offline, and ensuring an open and secure internet. This is a tall order for even perfect democracies, but it is an excellent message to send to countries like China and arguably Russia. The other statement on which India is a signatory is one on clean and just transition towards carbon neutrality. PM Modi made a forceful intervention on how India, without being responsible for the problem of climate change, is doing everything in its power to be part of the solution. He also made a fervent plea to the Western countries to invest heavily in India's renewable energy market. सही गल है, आप लोग को हेल्प करनी चाहिए हमारी, अगर हम खुद से कर रहे हैं तो. The G7 is trying hard not to be yesterday's club. It is still a powerful grouping with 7 of its members in the top 10 economies of the world. 3 of them permanent members of the UNSC, and if you count the EU, it is still home to some of the best emerging technologies. India's participation in this meeting as an observer serves to advance its foreign and security policy objectives and will keep it in good stead when it assumes the G20 presidency in December. अगली बार अपनी प्रेसिडेंसी है, ध्यान रखना. एक लास्ट वाला दिख रहा था G7 का, पढ़ लेते हैं, लेकिन मज़ा आएगा नहीं, मुझे लग नहीं रहा. Meet ends G7 vow to crush Russia's income. एनर्जी लेते तो थक नहीं रहे उससे. Leaders of the world's wealthiest democracies struck a united stance to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, as Russia's invasion grinds on, and said they would explore far-reaching steps to cap Kremlin income from oil sales that are financing the war. The final statement Tuesday underlined their intent to impose severe and immediate economic costs on Russia. It left out key details on how the fossil fuel price caps would work in practice, setting up more discussions to explore measures to bar imports of Russian oil. That would hit a key Russian source of income and, in theory, help relieve the energy price spikes and inflation afflicting the global economy as a result of the war. We remain steadfast in our commitment to our unprecedented coordination on sanctions for as long as necessary, acting in unison at every stage, leaders said. Before the summit's close, शक्लें देखना इनकी, कहाँ देखा, एक सेकंड, शक्लें देखना इनकी, अरे क्या ही बोलूं. Before the summit's close, leaders joined in condemning what they called the abominable Russian attack on a shopping mall in Ukraine, calling it a war crime and vowing that President Vladimir Putin will be held to account. The G7 leaders ऐसे ये Xi Jinping को होल्ड टू अकाउंट कर रहे थे पिछली बार जब कोविड-19 हुआ था. ये WHO की रिपोर्ट सी आ गई थी, कुछ दब गया वो तो दब गया मामला, छोड़ो उसको, भूल जाओ. On Monday pledged to support Ukraine for as long as it takes after conferring by video link. वीडियो पे ही सपोर्ट कर देंगे इसको, लाइक कर देंगे इसको. Zelensky has openly worried the West has become fatigued by the cost of a war that is contributing to soaring energy costs and price hikes on essential goods around the globe. चलो जी, अल्लाह हाफिज़, देख लेना आप लोग. जय भवानी, कुछ बचा हो तो ठीक है, मिलते हैं कल.